I'm looking at a magazine that's got a lot of photos of the 1980 Mr Olympia contest. It was a very controversial contest. Now, you know, there's been a lot of changes in bodybuilding since the 80s. In the 80s, the early 80s, I would have been one of the first people that was probably doing personal training. Back then, we did personal training in a gym. There weren't a lot of personal trainers. Now, you know, I train people online, I do it in the gym, and, you know, sometimes even outdoors. There's been a lot of changes that have taken place. Now, here I just want to show you the top 3 at the Mr Olympia of 1980. Now, as you can see, Arnold dwarfs the other 2 competitors, especially from the side. From the front, Arnold had a few problems. You know, I noted that Arnold standing next to Roger Walker, this guy here, had problems. You know, Roger ended up placing 6th. That 1980 Mr Olympia was held at the Sydney Opera House. It was Roger's home ground. Roger was in his best condition. A lot of people felt that Roger should have won. The way I saw it, Arnold lacked a lot. Arnold was definitely not at his best. Roger was. Was it enough to beat Arnold? I don't think that day. This is another photo of Roger. The guy's incredible. On that day, no one had enough to beat Arnold. Okay, what the problem was is that Arnold was way off his best condition. However, I still think, especially by the night show, that, you know, Arnold was able to pour it on. When he came out in the night show, whatever lacked in the pre-judging was made up for it. Back then, they would actually judge the posing. They actually judged you in the pose down, and that's where Arnold shined. You know, even me, look, you know, I competed against Lee Haney. I was 1 point ahead of him at the in the pre-judging. By the night show, because of the position that he was in and the stable life that he had, and, you know, his wife was there and all his entourage, he was able to pour it on. Okay, where I went away and I had something to eat and I came back a little bit bloated, this guy changed. He turned the tables. A lot of people thought I should have won. Here in the 1980 Mr Olympia, Arnold was capable of doing that. Plus the aura that this guy's got. You know, no one on stage had arms like Arnold. From the front, you could tell he was out of practice. I showed you photos from the side where he basically dwarfed Chris Dickerson and Frank Zane. Mike Mentzer looked good. Not good enough to beat Arnold. You've got to remember, there's 11 compulsory poses that you do in the pre-judging. Everybody on stage looked better than Arnold in one pose. You know, again, let me go back to Roger Walker, because Roger was devastating that year. He looked so good, and Roger was probably the only person on stage that had massive body parts that could match Arnold, like Roger's chest. Both Roger and Arnold could be considered that their chests are overdeveloped. Some people feel Arnold's biceps are overdeveloped. Perhaps. Roger had the mass. He was a shorter man. He was in better condition. He had better abdominals. And, you know, I got to know Roger really well just a few weeks ago. All these years that he's been in Australia, he was always a mystery to me. The other day, we actually had a business meeting, and Roger's not only very nice, he seems like he's a shy person and one of the nicest people I've ever met. I'm not sure I could say that about Arnold. However, I have spoken with Arnold briefly, and he was a gentleman when we did speak. Now, for the 1980 Mr Olympia, the way it went that day, I competed in the 1980 Best in Australia competition, which was an invitational show. Not sure if it makes any difference to anybody, but I was still a natural bodybuilder back then, and I looked very, very good. I needed to win that show because it was not easy competing in Australia. I got beaten several times that year. I said, no one in this country is going to be able to beat me. And not everyone that was the best body, it was considered the best in Australia, showed up, but the best ones did show up. Okay, I was lucky enough to win. In actual fact, there was no luck about what I did. There was a lot of hard work and a lot of strategic thinking. That year, winning that contest allowed me to compete in the IFBB Mr Universe in the Philippines, Manila. And unfortunately, there was only 6 weeks from the Best in Australia, which was also the same day that the Mr Olympia show was on, to the Mr Universe contest. And in those 6 weeks, I got fat and thin again. So when I showed up on stage, I was certainly not in good shape, but it gave me a chance to set my sights on what I needed to do in order to take out a Mr Universe title. So I trained naturally for about another 1.5 years and got as good as I could. Then, with small dosages of a couple of different supplements, I competed and won my first Mr Universe contest. But back to this Mr Olympia, that day when Arnold won, people actually booed. And I think it was like a pact mentality. You know, they did not get Arnold at their best. That's all that was missing. He was just not as good as what he was in the past. Out of those 11 compulsory poses, there really was people on that stage that looked better than Arnold in at least one pose. Okay? I'm not sure anybody looked better than him in a side chest or a front double bicep or had arms like his. Actually, front double bicep, he probably did not have the best one on stage, but there were just some poses that nobody could match, you know, especially standing side on relaxed. From the back, you know, he stood next to Roger Walker and did a back double bicep, and, you know, Roger looked really good from behind. There were other bodybuilders like Dennis Tinerino, who one judge placed first. You know, Dennis looked incredible. In fact, if I can find a photo of him here, look at him in this lineup. He's the guy in the middle. Look what he looks like. Look at those abdominal muscles. Look at the width of his shoulders and look at his conditioning. All right? Dennis placed nowhere. Then there was Danny Padilha, who was like so complete, but smooth. You know, we had a Samir Bannout in that show, who would 2 years later threaten everybody for the top title. 3 years later, he won the Olympia. On that day, Samir was smooth. You know, one of the most impressive bodybuilders that was there on the day was Boyer Coe. This is a photo of Mike Mentzer, Frank Zane, and Chris Dickerson. Okay? This is Boyer Coe, Samir Bannout, and Arnold backstage. It was very funny because I went backstage and Arnold was having an argument with somebody from Austria, or it seemed like they were arguing, but they were just talking very loudly, and I walked up with a piece of paper because the guy that Arnold was talking to trained at the same gym that I did. And so I thought, look, just go up and ask for an autograph. What's the worst he could do? Say no? So in actual fact, I went up, asked for an autograph, interrupted him and the person that he was speaking to. Arnold got the piece of paper, continued the conversation, and eventually signed it. And then, you know, he turned looking for me. I was pretending to be looking for something through my bag. So, you know, he turns around and he goes, where is this guy? And I stood up and I took it from him. Then later we all went on a harbour cruise around Sydney Harbour, and all the Mr Olympia competitors were on that boat. I was on that boat, and as I was going through a doorway, Maria Shriver stopped me, and she started questioning me, which probably came natural to her because she is a reporter and she's very good at asking questions. After she spoke to me for about 45 minutes, Arnold actually came over peeling a banana, probably wanting to see what the hell was going on. And when he came over, I was like, wow, this guy's actually coming over to me and you know, his soon-to-be wife. And when he came over, I just like told him how much I idolized him, what I thought of him, and how great he was. And I ran off like a shy kid. I was only 20 or 21 years of age. So the 1980 Mr Olympia was a very controversial contest that people are still talking about. Now, for me, my interest was, on that day, I knew that I was a hop, skip, and a jump away from turning pro. And Casey Viador, who I became friends with, because my actual training partner at the time, Billy Knight, was driving him around Sydney, he said to me, listen, you may want to enjoy what you're doing tonight, because once you turn pro, things are going to change. Now, you know, rest in peace, Casey, he's gone. He was so right. You know, professional bodybuilding, wow. You know, once you get involved in it, it consumes you. It's one of the hardest things you could ever do. And on that day, some of the best competitors in the history of bodybuilding were on stage. Samir Burnett, Dennis Tinerino, Danny Padilha, Boyako, Frank Zane, Chris Dickerson, Roger Walker, Roy Callender, Tom Platz, Ed Corney, Tony Emmett. They were all there. It was one of the best contests I've ever seen. Now, I purposely sat in the audience after I won my show and I studied these guys. I went all the way to the back of the auditorium to see what everybody looked like. I came down close to the front. I went on each side of the stage, and my view was that Arnold scraped it through, but he was the best on stage that day. He was way off what he normally looked like. And that is my take on it. You know, there were many bodybuilders that threatened him that day, but they just weren't good enough to take him out. It was as simple as that. If you like this, share it and leave some comments, please.